Where legends breathe again. Eldmyth. In the hushed stillness before memory, when the world was a canvas of primordial wonder, the ancients sensed a force in the heavens. They felt its warmth on their skin, saw its light banish the terrors of the night, and heard its invisible music in the rustling of sacred laurel leaves. They did not yet have a name for this presence, this sublime convergence of sun, song, and prophecy, but they knew it was divine. From this collective yearning, from the human need to give form to the formless, a legend was born. A legend of a god who drove a chariot of fire across the firmament, whose voice could heal or destroy, and whose arrows of light were both a blessing and a curse. This is not merely the story of a deity from a forgotten pantheon. This is the epic of Apollo, the most Greek of the gods, yet a figure whose essence transcends time and culture. We begin our journey in the shadow of Mount Olympus, where the air itself is thick with myth, and the echoes of his golden lyre still seem to linger, waiting to be heard once more. The story of Apollo's birth is a drama of light emerging from darkness, of order born from chaos. His mother, the gentle Titaness Leto, wandered the earth, persecuted by the jealous wrath of the goddess Hera. No land would offer her sanctuary, fearing the queen of heaven's displeasure. Finally, she found refuge on the barren, floating island of Delos, a place so insignificant it was beneath Hera's notice. There, clinging to a palm tree under the soft, gray light of a desperate dawn, Leto labored. For 9 days and 9 nights she suffered, until the goddess of childbirth, Ilithyia, was finally permitted to attend her. Then, in a single, radiant moment, the world changed. Apollo was born not as a mewling infant, but as a fully formed god. As his first cry echoed across the sea, the barren island of Delos burst into bloom, covered in golden flowers. The very air shimmered with a new, purer light. This was no ordinary child. This was the coming of the sun itself, a being of immediate and overwhelming power, destined to define an age of reason, art, and celestial law. Within mere days of his birth, the precocious god demonstrated his formidable nature. He demanded a bow and lyre, and his father Zeus provided them, forged by the master smith Hephaestus. Nourished not by milk but by nectar and ambrosia, Apollo grew to divine maturity with impossible speed. His first great quest was one of vengeance and protection. From his sanctuary at Delphi, the great serpent Python, a child of the primordial earth, hissed its foul prophecies and terrorized the region. It was a creature of ancient, chaotic power, a remnant of the old world that the new Olympian order sought to supplant. Apollo, the embodiment of light and reason, saw this monster as the ultimate symbol of disorder. With his silver bow gleaming in the sun, he pursued the beast through the steep, rocky clefts of Mount Parnassus. The confrontation was epic, a clash of eras, the raw, untamed earth against the brilliant, structured light of the heavens. With unerring aim, Apollo loosed a volley of his golden arrows. Each shaft was a beam of concentrated sunlight, piercing the serpent's scaly hide. The python thrashed and roared, its dark blood staining the sacred ground, but it could not withstand the purifying fury of the sun god. Its defeat was absolute. In triumph, Apollo took possession of the Oracle at Delphi, which had been guarded by the beast. He installed his own priestess, the Pythia, who, seated over a fissure in the earth that breathed mysterious vapors, would now speak his prophecies. This act established Apollo as a god of not just physical light, but of intellectual and spiritual illumination. He transformed a place of ancient terror into the very center of the known world, the navel of the earth, where kings and commoners alike would journey for centuries to seek the god's cryptic counsel. Apollo was a god of profound duality. The same hand that could guide the sun and deliver prophecies could also bring terrible plague. When the Greek king Agamemnon offended Apollo's priest Chryses, the god's response was swift and merciless. Homer sings of this in the Iliad. Apollo descended from Olympus like the night itself, his face darker than gloom. He sat on a hill overlooking the Greek camp and began to fire his arrows, not of light, but of disease. A terrible pestilence fell upon the army. For 9 days, the arrows of the god rained down, and the funeral pyres burned incessantly. This was the far-shooter, the god who could strike from an impossible distance, a reminder that his light, if scorned, could become a scorching, deadly fire. It was a display of divine wrath that showcased the absolute power of the Olympians and the dire consequences of hubris against the gods. But Apollo's nature was not solely one of vengeance. He was also the leader of the Muses, the divine patron of music, poetry, and art. His lyre, a gift from Hermes, could produce melodies so sweet that even the rough stones of Thebes would rise to form walls of their own accord, and the rivers would halt their flow to listen. This artistic spirit, however, led to one of his most poignant myths, the story of the satyr Marsyas. This foolish creature found the aulos, a double-reed flute that the goddess Athena had discarded. Becoming a master of the instrument, Marsyas grew boastful, and in his pride, he challenged Apollo himself to a musical contest. The terms were dire. The winner could do whatever he wished to the loser. The scene was set for a confrontation between the raw, passionate music of the earth, represented by Marsyas's flute, and the refined, celestial harmony of Apollo's lyre. The contest was judged by the Muses themselves. Marsyas played with wild, rustic passion, and his music was powerful, stirring the primal instincts of all who heard it. But when Apollo played, the very order of the cosmos seemed to realign. His music was mathematics given sound, a perfect harmony that spoke of the motions of the planets and the logic of the universe. Yet the contest was so close that Apollo, fearing he might be bested, resorted to cunning. He challenged Marsyas to turn his instrument upside down and play and sing simultaneously, a feat possible with a lyre, but impossible with a flute. Defeated and exposed, Marsyas stood condemned. Apollo's victory was one of intellect over instinct, of celestial order over earthly chaos, but the punishment he inflicted was a grim testament to the cruel potential within the god of light. The wrath of a challenged god is a terrible thing. For his hubris, Marsyas was tied to a tree and flayed alive by the victorious Apollo. His cries were said to have formed the river that bore his name, a perpetual, sorrowful reminder of the cost of challenging the divine. This myth serves as a dark counterpart to Apollo's artistic patronage. It illustrates that the pursuit of art and knowledge, under Apollo's domain, must be tempered with respect and humility. The same god who inspired poets could also silence them in the most horrific way. His was a world of strict boundaries and severe consequences, where the light of reason could, in an instant, become the unfeeling glare of absolute judgment. Apollo's life was not without its own profound sorrows, and his relationships with mortals often ended in tragedy, reflecting the painful divide between the immortal and the mortal world. One of the most heartrending of these tales is that of Hyacinthus, a Spartan prince of extraordinary beauty and youth. Apollo loved him deeply, and they often competed in athletic games, a symbol of their joyful companionship. One day, as they were throwing the discus, Apollo put all his divine strength into a magnificent throw. The discus soared through the air, a gleaming slice of bronze in the sun. Eager to impress his divine lover, Hyacinthus ran to retrieve it. But in a cruel twist of fate, the discus struck a stone, veered wildly off its course, and hit the young prince in the head, mortally wounding him. As Hyacinthus lay dying in his arms, even Apollo, with all his power of healing, could not save the one he loved. The fates had decreed his end, and not even a god could undo their threads. In his grief, Apollo refused to let Hades claim the boy entirely. From the blood that soaked into the earth, the god caused a beautiful flower to spring forth. Its petals stained a deep, mournful crimson, and upon its leaves Apollo inscribed the Greek letters Ai, a cry of woe. The hyacinth flower became an eternal monument to a life cut short and a god's immortal grief. This story reveals a more vulnerable Apollo, a being capable of a love so deep that his own eternal life becomes a burden, a perpetual reminder of a mortal loss. Another tragic love was his pursuit of the nymph Daphne. Apollo, having been struck by one of Eros's golden arrows of desire, became infatuated with her. But Daphne, a devotee of Artemis who wished to remain chaste, was struck by a leaden arrow of aversion and fled from the god. A desperate chase ensued through the forests and along the riverbanks. Apollo, with his divine speed, gained on her, his pleas echoing through the trees. As he reached out to grasp her, Daphne, in a final, desperate prayer to her father, the river god Peneus, cried out for salvation. In that moment of capture, her transformation began. Her skin hardened into bark, her hair lengthened into leaves, and her outstretched arms became the branches of a laurel tree. Apollo arrived only to embrace rough bark instead of soft flesh. Heartbroken yet reverent, Apollo declared, "Since you cannot be my bride, you shall at least be my tree." He made the laurel his sacred plant, and from that day forward, wreaths of laurel leaves became the highest honor for victors in the Pythian games, for poets, and for triumphant generals. The laurel crown became a universal symbol of achievement, peace, and victory, born from a story of unrequited love and respectful acceptance. This myth encapsulates a different kind of loss than that of Hyacinthus, one not of death, but of transformation, where desire is sublimated into a lasting, sacred symbol that would echo through the ages. As the god of prophecy, Apollo's most significant center was the aforementioned Oracle at Delphi. The process of consultation was a profound ritual. After purification in the Castalian spring and the payment of a sacrifice, the seeker would be led into the inner chamber, the Aditon. Here, the Pythia, usually a simple local woman, would seat herself on a tripod over the chasm. She would inhale the intoxicating vapors rising from the earth, often described as the breath of Apollo himself, chew laurel leaves, and enter a trance-like state. Possessed by the god, she would utter riddles and fragmented phrases. These were not clear answers but cryptic puzzles that required interpretation by the temple priests. The voice was hers, but the wisdom, the terrifying and sublime insight, was the voice of Apollo, channeled through a mortal vessel. The influence of Apollo did not fade with the fall of the Greek and Roman empires. His image was adopted and adapted throughout history. In the Renaissance, artists like Michelangelo and Raphael depicted him as the ideal of male beauty and classical reason. His statue, the Apollo Belvedere, became the standard for anatomical perfection and noble composure. In the Enlightenment, he was embraced as a symbol of logic, light, and the triumph of reason over superstition. Even in the modern world, his legacy endures. We see him in the names of NASA's missions to the moon, a direct link to his identity as the sun god. He appears in countless novels, films, and video games, often reimagined as a complex figure of power, art, and sometimes arrogance. From the sun-scorched plains of Troy, where his arrows brought plague, to the serene slopes of Parnassus, where his music calmed the wild, Apollo's domain was the space between chaos and order. He was the god who could heal a city with a word and destroy an army with a thought. He was the musician whose melodies built cities, and the archer whose aim was the unerring truth. He was a lover who experienced profound loss, and a god who understood the price of mortality. His myths are not just entertaining stories. They are the foundational narratives through which the ancient Greeks understood their world, the struggle between passion and reason, the beauty and terror of the divine, and the enduring human quest for knowledge, art, and meaning under the sun. And so, as the last notes of his lyre fade into the echoes of time, and the final gleam of his sun chariot disappears beyond the western horizon, we are left with the essence of Apollo, a god of light who understood shadows, a god of healing who inflicted wounds, a god of truth who spoke in riddles. He reminds us that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin, that inspiration is often born from suffering, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey with no end. The ruins of his temples may crumble, but the ideals he represented, the light of reason, the power of art, and the eternal search for meaning, continue to illuminate the human spirit. He is not just a memory of a forgotten age. He is a perpetual presence, a symbol of the brilliant, complicated, and beautiful struggle that is life itself. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.